Hi, Dara Ryder here from Ahead with a quick introduction to the structure of the UDL guidelines. When you first view them, there's a lot in there, so you might feel like it's a little daunting or confusing, but the guidelines are actually structured in a way to make them easy enough to unpick once you know where to look. At the highest level of the framework, we have the three principles of UDL. The first principle calls for educators to design multiple means of engagement to ensure that we tap into the motivations and experiences of all our learners and get them interested in what we are teaching. We can think about this principle as being all about the why of learning. Why do our learners come to our programs, and how can we ensure they connect with their peers and stay motivated enough to complete our courses? The second principle is to design multiple means of representation, where we make sure that we represent knowledge in different ways and ensure all learners have options that help them to internalize the what of learning. In other words, our brains are all unique, and research shows that providing content in multiple modalities and teaching topics in different ways helps more learners get those light bulb moments that we all crave as educators. The third principle is to design multiple means of action and expression, which we can think of as relating to the how of learning. This principle ensures that we give all learners options for how they show what they know in assessment and express themselves more generally in the classroom. Each principle has a colour. For example, the engagement principle is green, and related information is presented vertically. The principles each contain three guidelines, which help us to implement the principle. For example, the engagement principle contains guidelines which talk about designing options for welcoming interests and identities, options for sustaining effort and persistence, and options for developing our learners' emotional capacity. Each guideline is numbered for reference. Note that all of the guidelines start with a call to design options for learners in some way, which is a key tenet of UDL. Helpfully, each guideline contains a deeper level of useful practices, which help us to implement the guideline. These are called considerations in UDL speak. Interestingly, in previous iterations of the UDL guidelines, these were called checkpoints, but CAST evolved the language to avoid the misconception that UDL is a checklist of practices, and instead clarified that they are reflective prompts to consider and get us thinking more deeply about how we teach. Think of them as kind of like an evidence-based toolbox. We know that each of these practices works, but it's up to you to pick the right tools for your learners, your field, and your context. The considerations are also numbered in relation to the guideline they sit under for easy reference. So under Guideline 8 about sustaining effort and persistence, the first consideration about clarifying the meaning and purpose of goals is numbered Consideration 8.1. Now before you ask why the seemingly first guideline starts at number 7, I'll say that you don't need to worry much about that. But if you must know, it's because in the early versions of the framework, the engagement principle was actually ordered as the last of the three, but in later versions, they moved it forward to reflect the crucial nature of learner engagement. After all, if you don't have engaged learners, you don't have opportunity for learning to take place, full stop. What's really handy is that if you click on any of these guidelines or considerations, you'll find an easy explainer guide. And my favorite part, you can further explore the significant body of evidence which supports each guideline and consideration by clicking the associated research button. Returning to the guidelines for a moment, while each principle is organized vertically, there is also a less discussed horizontal relationship between the guidelines in each principle, which tells you something about their purpose too. The top layer of the guidelines are labeled access guidelines because the practices associated with them ensure foundational access for all learners to the knowledge and challenge our programs offer. If you like, they open the front door to learning. Now that they are in the front door, the second layer of guidelines are labeled support because they ensure learners have the scaffolds they need to build on that access and actually understand the knowledge and engage in the learning challenge you wish to present. The third layer of guidelines are labeled executive function guidelines because they go a step further and develop deeper critical thinking amongst our learners, support complex comprehension skills, and the ability of our learners to focus and plan for their success. If you're not familiar with the term executive function, it refers to the cognitive processes in our brain that control working memory and our ability to plan, focus, and adapt to new concepts and processes, tasks which are all essential to success in education and employment. Our executive function skills continue to develop well into adulthood and need to be habitually practiced and refined, so this layer of the guidelines supports learners to do just that. So what does this all amount to? Well, to sum it all up, it's about fostering learner agency for all, and that's clearly highlighted in the last piece of the puzzle, the overarching goal of the UDL framework. If this seems like a lot, remember that nobody, not even the UDL experts, are using each and every one of the considerations in their work, and the framework doesn't intend for educators to do so. Like we said already, it's about expanding your teaching toolbox, getting you to think more deeply about your practice, and picking the right tools to reach and teach all of your learners. Have fun exploring further.